In this video, you're going to learn all about absolute value. Absolute value is a number's distance from zero, and straight line brackets is how you designate absolute value. So whenever you see these straight lines instead of parentheses, it's talking about a number's absolute value. So the absolute value of -7 is its distance from zero, which -7, if we picture a number line, is 7 units from 0. So -7 is 7 away from 0. Also, +7, go figure. That is also 7 units away from 0. So the absolute value of -7 is 7. The absolute value of +7 is 7. Since absolute value is talking about distance, it's always positive. So give me a second, I'll write this down and you can copy it down too. So make sure you have this down in your notes. Absolute value is a number's distance from 0. It's always positive. In this example, I'm going to say the absolute value of -3 is +3. -3 is 3 away from 0. The absolute value of 3 is also 3. So I'm going to write this. The absolute value of a number x is just equal to x. So that's going to be equal to the absolute value of that same number if it's negative. Let's go ahead and do some examples where we're going to have to solve. In this example, we are just going to see how absolute value works. So we need to evaluate, which means find the value of this expression, 7.3 minus the absolute value of 2x plus 6, if x equals -12 and 1/10. So where I see x, I'm going to plug in -12 and 1/10. So we've got 7.3, or 7 3/10, minus the absolute value of 2 times -12 and 1/10 plus 6. Absolute value is grouping symbols. So in the order of operations, your grouping symbols, or parentheses, okay, are what you have to find first. So we've got to figure out the value of this before we can solve the problem. So I'm going to do 2 times -12 and 1/10 plus 6. I'm just going to put that all in my calculator, and I am going to get -16 and 2/10. And I'm sorry, that is -18 and 2/10. And so that's in absolute values. I have 7 3/10 minus that. Well, remember that absolute value is distance from 0. So -18 and 2/10, the absolute value of that is really +18 and 2/10. So we have 7 3/10 minus 18 and 2/10. And I'm going to get -10 and 9/10. So that's how you work with absolute value, plugging numbers in. In this next example, we are going to solve an equation that involves absolute value. In this example, we're going to solve the equation 4 equals the absolute value of x plus 5. What that means is that this absolute value has a value of 4, which means that what's inside here can either be equal to 4 or it could be equal to -4, because both of these numbers have an absolute value of 4. So because it could equal 4 or -4, we are going to solve both equations. So we are going to solve the inside of the absolute value is equal to 4, and we're also going to solve that equal to negative 4. Again, we need the absolute value to be equal to 4, which means it could be 4 or negative 4. Okay, so let's solve those two equations. I'm going to put a line in the middle here. We want to get x by itself, so I'm going to subtract 5, and I'm going to get x could be equal to negative 1. And I'm going to do this problem. I'm going to subtract 5, and I'm going to get x is equal to negative 9. Whenever x can be equal to two different numbers, we say it's the number set, and we put the numbers in order. They don't have to be in order, it's just more proper if they are. So here is your answer. X can be either one of those. We're going to check it by plugging it in. If I plug in negative 9 here, negative 9 plus 5 is negative 4. So that's great, it works. If I plug in negative 1 into this same place, negative 1 plus 5 is equal to positive 4, and the absolute value of positive 4 is 4. So these answers work. In this example, we're going to solve negative 3 times the absolute value of 4x equals 12. When we're solving equations with absolute value, we learned we're always going to solve two equations. However, we need to make sure that we have the absolute value by itself. So what we need to do first to get this absolute value by itself is we need to divide both sides by negative 3. That's going to get rid of this negative 3. It's going to give me just plain 4x. 12 divided by negative 3 is equal to negative 4. So I have an absolute value that is equal to a negative number. And we know that that is impossible. So if you ever have this happen, the answer to this is no solution. And you may see this written as the solution set. So x equals, your squiggly brackets, a 0 with a line through it, which means no solution. Okay, so I'll do another example where there are solutions, but sometimes you have an absolute value equal to a negative, which means that's not actually possible. Okay, so we'll do another one where you have to get the absolute value by itself and then solve it twice. Let's see an example like that. In this example, we have negative 3 times the quantity, or the absolute value of 2x equals negative 18. We need to get the absolute value by itself first. So what we're going to do is we are going to divide by negative 3. And this time when we divide by negative 3, we end up getting positive 6. These are gone, and we are left with the absolute value of 2x equals positive 6. If the absolute value equals positive 6, then what's inside here, this 2x, that can either be equal to positive 6 or it can be equal to negative 6. We know that to get x by itself, we just divide by 2, which leaves me x equals 6 divided by 2 is 3. And over here, when we divide by 2, x is equal to negative 3. Right? And so there's your solution set. We're going to check both of those by plugging it into our original equation here. And 2 times positive 3 gives me 6. And negative 3 times 6 is negative 18. So that works. If we have negative 3, we get a negative 6 in here. The absolute value of negative 6 is positive 6. And so negative 3 times positive 6 does equal negative 18. So both of these solutions work. In this example, we have the absolute value of x plus 10 equals 4x minus 8. The absolute value is by itself. So we can go ahead and say that what is inside this absolute value, this x plus 10, that's going to equal positive 4x minus 8, or it's going to equal the negative of that version of 4x plus 8. So that's going to look like this. And I said plus, but I meant minus. Okay? So we've got x plus 10 is either equal to positive or negative the quantity of 4x minus 8. So let's go ahead and solve the problem here on the left. I'm going to subtract x from both sides and get 3x. I'm going to add 8 to both sides and get 18. I'm going to divide by 3, and x is equal to 6. Over here, I've got to distribute my negative. So I have negative 4x plus 8. And I'm going to essentially do the same thing. I'm going to subtract an x, and that's going to give me negative 5x. And I'm going to subtract 8, and I'm going to get 2. And then I'm going to divide by negative 5, so that x equals negative 2/5. So I would say that my solution set is x equals negative 2/5 and 6. And I'm going to plug it in and check. And I'm going to plug in the negative 2/5 first. So if I plug in negative 2/5 plus 10, that's going to give me 9 3/5. And if I plug that into the other side here, let's see, 4 times negative 2/5 minus 8, that is going to give me negative 9.6. And over here I get 9 6/10, and so those are equal. And over here when I plug in 6, I get 16 equals 4 times 6 is 24, and 24 minus 8 is 16. So here is my solution. I also want to point out that you might just have one solution anytime that an absolute value is equal to 0. So 3 times the absolute value of x equals 0. We would get the absolute value by itself. So we get the absolute value is equal to 0. Well, there's no positive and negative 0. So you just say, hey, what's inside here is equal to 0. And that is your solution. If it would have been x plus 3, the absolute value of that equal to 0, you would have just solved x plus 3 equal to 0 and said, hey, x is negative 3. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and write out some steps for solving absolute value equations, and then we're done. Here are some steps to solving those absolute value equations. You always want to get the absolute value by itself on one side of the equation. Then you want to set up two equations with that inside, whatever was inside the absolute value, that's going to be equal to positive and negative, the other side of the equation, whatever that was. You're going to solve both equations, and then you're going to check both answers, and then you're going to write your answer as the variable equals those answers in those brackets. All right, that's all you need to know. You've got it. Good luck.